Let's see two pictures. The first picture you see is China's Beijing in 2012, and the one below it is taken in 2024. Beijing went from being the smog capital of the world to now cutting its pollution by 70% in just a decade. Now let's see one more picture. This was taken this year in 2025, similar to China in 2012, right? Well, Delhi was in the top 5 polluted cities since 2004, and now 20 years later, it still is. Now look at this picture. That's China's bullet train network, which is also the longest in the world, covering 47,000 kilometers. China started planning for its bullet trains in 1995. Construction began in 1999, and its first pilot bullet train opened in 2003. And within a decade, it built the longest high-speed rail network in the world. Whereas in India, the planning for bullet trains started in 2010, construction started in 2017, and we still don't have a single bullet train yet. That's 15 years and counting. China is the same nation that had lower GDP than India in the early 1980s. But then China took over India in just a few years, and ever since then, the gap has been consistently increasing. Why do you think so? How did China become so powerful and so big in the global shade? Welcome to Angel One Economics. My name is Atsari, and today we will decode how far is India from China. Is it 15 years, or is it 30 years? Or is it even more? In this video, we will walk you through the 4 different phases of China's growth. But first, here's the real question. Why do some countries keep growing while others slow down, even if both of them start at the same point? China didn't just grow, it built 3 things that kept multiplying its output year after year: capital, labor, and technology. For capital, they had one goal: to build first and then scale later. China's early bet was simple: build the infrastructure first and then attract investors. So money went into the basics that make the economy run fast, which is rail, ports, power, industrial corridors, and stuff that reduces friction in every business. As a result, China was the world's largest high-speed rail network. 7 of the world's top 10 ports are Chinese today, and it is the manufacturing hub of the world with a global share of up to 30%. And that is not a joke. When logistics plus infrastructure work like a machine, businesses don't just grow, they scale. Second is labor, to move people into productivity. Don't just sit on a stagnant population, right? China pushed hard on urban job creation, on factory ecosystems and clusters, so workers, vendors, suppliers, and logistics were all in one tight loop. As a result, the wages stopped looking cheap. Chinese manufacturing labor costs rose sharply versus many Asian nations. So, when more work happens inside formal, scalable firms, the productivity automatically rises faster, right? The skills improve faster and the exports become repeatable and not accidental. Only 30% of their workforce is in informal sector, whereas for India, the share is 80%. Next is technology. Make output per worker explode. Once you've built the base, upgrade the engine through technology and automation. That means R&D, industrial upgrading, and deploying robots at national scale. The proof is shocking. In 2024, China installed about 295,000 industrial robots, which is 54% of global deployments. Yeah, that's literally more than the rest of the world combined. And as a result, even as the wages rise, the productivity rises faster, so the manufacturing machines stay competitive. Now, these 3 drivers are not random. Nobel laureate Robert Solow explained long-term economic output using the same 3 drivers, which is capital, labor, and technology. China treated it less like a theory and more like a playbook. Technology is the amplifier, and it turns more inputs into way more output per person. And the outcome is this: China's GDP is 4.8 times India's, and China's GDP per capita is 4.9 times per India's. Up until 1980, China's economy was not just poor but chaotic. Over 80% of its population was under the poverty line. And in 1978, when Deng Xiaoping took over as the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, China's GDP per capita was lower than not just India, but also a sub-Saharan African nation. But when Deng came in, he changed the fate of the nation to a direction which now seems unachievable. Let's see one by one on what China did right and what India can learn from it. In this video, we will walk you through the 4 different phases of China's growth since 1980s, the same period when both India and China were in the same position. First phase. 1980 to 1990 in China was all about speed up campaigns. It treated time as capital. How? China didn't open the economy everywhere at once. It basically started with pilot cities, converted them into special economic zones, and then treated them like policy labs. Inside these zones, the rules were pretty different. Faster land acquisition, lower taxes, relaxed labor laws, and minimal government interference so that the private companies can come, set up, and scale fast. A city like Shenzhen went from being a fish village to a manufacturing hub in just 1 decade. Their exports grew by 5 times. Their output grew by 10 to 12% annually. And this system was a total hit because if a policy worked well inside these zones, it was scaled and copied in phases across the country. And if it did not work well, even better because the failure was cheap, localized, and fast. Now look closer into this graph. It shows the global manufacturing share or the share of total global manufacturing output produced by a country. China took a major leap in 2000s, and now it has a 30% share, while the US shares 17% and India shares only 3%. Whereas in India, during this period, was more inward looking, with license Raj, a limited private sector, and limited infrastructure investments. Forget creating special economic zones. In fact, the SEZ policy in India was first announced in 2000, 20 years after China. Yes, we did have export oriented zones, but none of them had incentives or frameworks on land or tax. So, why would the companies build in such uncertain places, right? As a result, our labor was moving more to the informal sector, forget manufacturing sector. Now comes the second phase, which is 1990 to 2000. It was all about scaling up fast in China. In this phase, they did something that set them apart from not just India, but the whole world. China went on a capacity building spree. It first built the factories and then attracted investments from the private sector. It went from 3% share in the global manufacturing to 8 to 9% in just 20 years. Imagine in just 20 years, they set this record when most nations like US, UK, or Japan took 40 to 50 years to get to the scale. National highways and ports expanded rapidly, power generation capacity more than doubled, and it became the world's leader in textiles and electronics, and a cheap supplier to the global brands as well. All in all, they had one core principle to build first, have proof of work ready, and then attract investments. Another interesting thing that happened during this period. Look at this graph. China's R&D expenses as a percentage of GDP was way lesser than India before 2000s, until it wasn't anymore. That divergence happened and how? Since 2008, our R&D expenses have just gone down, whereas China's is just a percent lower than that of the US. As of 2023, China filed the highest number of patent applications, which is 3 times of what the US did, and well, 25 times of what India did. This means China isn't just manufacturing, but also innovating to a level which is unbeatable. India's 1990 decade began with a crisis, the infamous balance of payment crisis. When our foreign reserves fell to 2 weeks of imports, India had to pledge gold to secure IMF loan. But the best thing came out of it. We opened our economy to the world, removed industrial licensing, and then reduced import tariffs. The growth was very slow. Our global manufacturing share was at 2% when China's was at 9%. Our infra faced chronic shortages, power cuts, congestions. Meanwhile, China doubled its power capacity. We still didn't build a system to support it due to our loans, coalition politics, and, well, state central rivalries. India's exports did grow, but only by 2.5 times, whereas China's exports grew by 5 times. And that's mainly because the manufacturing sector did not absorb labor at scale. Most of our labor moved to informal services. As of recently, 80% of India's workforce is in informal sector, whereas for China, that share is only 30%. What does that mean? Think of mom and pop shops, daily wage earners, street vendors, tiny factories outside the supply chains. All these jobs have no formal wages or written contracts, right? And all of this is more in India. During our research, we also came across something very interesting. China has a clean bureaucracy devoid of any local corruption. You can say this is one of the perks of, like a one-party government system, where the city officials were promoted only based on three things: GDP growth, industrial output, and employment creation. That's it. If your city grew, you moved up. And if it did not, you were replaced. This created competition between cities. Local governments competed to clear projects faster and attract factories before the next city did. Next phase is 2000 to 2010, when China was all about building a trade ecosystem. Most people think that China became powerful because, it joined the WTO in 2001, but China joined the WTO because it was already strong enough to compete. It had already spent 2 decades in preparation. The WTO just unlocked West to China. China became indispensable to the US and the Europe. The exports jumped from $250 billion to $1.6 trillion. China's share of global manufacturing reached 20% in just 1 decade. And it became the world's largest exporter and the backbone of global supply chain. And lastly, the labor was absorbed at the historic scale. Tens of millions moved from farms to factories, and hence the productivity jumped by multifolds. It was also during this time that it worked on its pollution problem. In the thousands, Beijing's sky was often obscured by thick gray smog, making it the smog capital of the world. This was fueled by heavy coal consumption, booming car ownership, and expansion of polluting industries. So, what did it do to fix it? It put $100 billion to innovate science based policies to curb the pollution and convert to cleaner energy. As a result, over the years, the coal consumption fell drastically from 21 million tons annually to under 6 lakhs tons. This nation has always been a forward thinker. In mid 2000s, it was giving heavy subsidies to solar manufacturers even when the demand was very less. Again, the same principle, right? Manufacture first and then demand later. And honestly, it was smart. The government was willing to tolerate the losses of making the solar components because it knew that whoever controls the inputs also controls the pricing. And as of today, it has the largest solar and wind capacity in the world. Whereas India, which was already a WTO member since 1995, was largely service led in IT, software, with lesser depth in manufacturing. And hence, when China was the assembler of electronics, we were rather importers. And mind you, our manufacturing sector was still stagnant at 15% back then. But on the brighter side, we did attract more FDIs post 2000s in telecom, auto sector, etc. Coming to the last phase, which is 2010 to 2020, which was all about global race to the top for China. When Deng Xiaoping came to power in 1980, he said only one thing: to be rich is glorious. That's it. The Chinese people thought, hell yes, we have been poor for way too long, and now they had a leader who was working to make everyone rich. In this phase, China did exactly that. It broke the middle income trap. Now, more Chinese have been uplifted to middle income and upper income from the poor category, whereas India's income distribution still stands skewed. The next question China asked was, how do we produce smarter and faster? It did not try to compete on cheap labor anymore. It competed on productivity. Today, China installs more industrial robots every year than the rest of the world combined, more than US, Europe, Japan, and South Korea put together. In 2015, China had set up around 2,000 government backed funds to support high tech industries. It formalized this shift with a policy called Made in China 2025. This wasn't about cheap exports anymore. It targeted robotics, aerospace, EVs, semiconductors, industrial machinery, medical equipments. In short, the goal was to control the most valuable parts of the value chain. Let's take EVs for example. China today produces 60% of world's EVs. Companies like BYD started as battery manufacturers, and now it's one of the top global EV leaders. They stopped hiding behind foreign brands and now created their own brands like Huawei, Xiaomi, and DJI. In green energy, China has 70% of global EV production, 80% of battery manufacturing dominating in lithium, rare earth, and 70% of global solar panel manufacturing. So by 2020, they had global Chinese brands, a more productive workforce, a lead on green energy and robotics, and they had 40,000 kilometers of high speed rail with much lesser travel times, and 70% reduced pollution as well. Whereas in India, we were still asking the old question: how do we produce more? Although we had fair share of our wins too, like Aadhaar, UPI, digital payments, telecom penetration in this decade, but take a second and think about this. India formally decided to kickstart EVs in 2015, but China started its first EV experimentation in 2001. And in 2015, it was actually shifting its gears to control everything that makes EVs possible so that the world turned to China for batteries and its components. Meanwhile, we launched incentives for batteries, lithium, rare earth as recently as 2021, behind China for 20 years. To conclude, how far is India from China really? The honest answer is India is not just behind China by years, India is behind China by systems too. China didn't grow fast because it had better people. It grew faster because it made different choices earlier. If India tries to replicate China's exact path, then yes, the gap looks like 25 to 30 years. Easy. But that's the wrong comparison, right? India doesn't need to become China. India needs to become India with multipliers. We already have digital public infrastructure at a population scale, a young workforce in a world that's aging, democratic legitimacy, global trust as a neutral partner, and a world that wants alternatives to China. China, on the flip side, has progressed exponentially with its people, with its companies, with itself. A factory worker in China today earns more than a lakh rupees per month. That's higher than many Asian nations, including ours. People in China are happier than India. They get cleaner air, the world class rail system, clean energy, shorter travel times, more robots to do the daily tasks. I mean, most of the hotels in China today have robots as room service. If you want to know if AI is killing jobs, maybe look at China. It absorbed the shock pretty well. Although today their unemployment rates look pretty similar, but job quality and formality are very different things, right? So, formal jobs can lead to more automation, productivity, and higher incomes, whereas informal jobs, like in the case of India, leads to stagnated income. So for us, the dire need is to fix the basics. Learn from the nation that rose from a poverty of 80%. India's journey has been different, shaped by democracy, diversity, and debate. Slower, messier, but deeply human. And the real gap is probably in forward thinking and executions. We still have a long, long way to go, but we will definitely get there. Today, India is growing at a rate China was growing in 2010. It could be a gap of 15 years or maybe even a gap of just 10 years because we have something that China does not have, a youth that's motivated and powerful. Don't you think so? That's it from my end. Thank you for watching. We put a lot of efforts into bringing out the best stories in the best forms. So like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more such deep dives. And don't forget to let us know in the comments below about which story you would like us to explore. See you in the next one.